So give their marching orders. So salespeople need daily tasks. If they don't have direction, salespeople will become lazy. It's human nature. If they don't have anything to do, they're going to be in the office, bothering my office staff when they got to work. It happens, right? So you got to give them their marching orders. You got to tell them what to do. That's why the flyering program works so well, guys. You're like, I don't want a flyer, but it gives them something to do. Be honest with you, if we didn't get one call, it still gives them something to do. We're getting, the word out. They're seeing the vehicle. Are we going to get a call? Yes, I already know it. You know what I mean? But it gives them something to do out there. So you have to always be a step ahead of your salespeople. You are going to get some wild horses. I'll tell a story about Jody Stedman. He was a lieutenant colonel in the military. And when he came on with me, he was selling $400 jobs every day. And he comes to me, he's like, Pat, and I was watching him and I'm training him, right? And we're like, I guess we're 4 weeks into this now. And he's like, Pat, I'm making $15 an hour. And I'm like, well, yeah. He's like, what do you mean? Well, yeah. I'm like, you're selling $400 jobs. Why are you selling $400 jobs? And so he was, we have a lot of military guys in our area, right? So he was always wanting to give them a deal, I'm working for the customer, I'm getting the price down low. And it was all in his head. And he was like, I just want to sell jobs and get all of them closed. He had like a 90% closing ratio. I'm like, whoa, Jody, we got to look at this, right? So we literally were in a yelling match outside the front of my shop, like yelling at him. He started yelling at me. And you ever heard the tone scale? So you literally have to come to their level or then they're not hearing you. They're just yelling at you and they're not hearing you. You could be like, oh, I'm so sorry, you know what I mean? And they don't care. They're just yelling. You got to bring your level up to there. Then they're like, okay. You know what I'm saying? So literally he was yelling at me like I was one of his troops. And I'm like, Jody, you have to do this. Like, this is the system. And we're out and my wife's like cracking the door open. She's like hearing us yelling and stuff like that. And I'm like, you have to sell the jobs, follow the system, like quote everything. You're not quoting everything. And he's just going through, well, they didn't need this. They didn't. And he's like nitpicking, right? All this stuff. He wasn't following the system. So literally, we're in a yelling match. He's like, fine, I'll do it your way. You'll see. We're not going to sell anything, and I'm not going to be here anymore. And I'm like, you're going to see. You're going to start selling stuff. And we're like yelling back and forth. I mean, he's like, all right, fine. And we went our separate ways, right? And he went out in the car. Well, literally, that week, he sold his first like $3,000 job because he quoted everything. He started doing the package correctly. And he's like, Pat, you won't believe this. I just sold a $3,000 job. And I'm like, what did you do differently? I did what you said. You know what I mean? And then he started following the system. And then sure enough, he sold like 40, I forget what it was. Sam Brooks beat it and Greg beat it this year. But it was like $43,000 in a month or something. One guy, which is pretty awesome. And so he crushed it. And then he's just like on fire now. And he was just closing $1,000 jobs left and right. So following the system, but you're going to get territory managers that are wild horses, right? Yes?
Tell them about the missing flyers.
Which ones? Oh, in the garage there? Yeah, and that's another good story. So, I have so many stories and why we put GPSs on the vehicles, right? So it was a friend of the family, and he was actually living in their downstairs apartment. And so he was coming in every day, at 9 o'clock, picking up his flyers, signing them out and everything, right? And I noticed that his leads there's no leads. But he's handing out the flyers, but guess what? Numbers don't lie, right? It's all track record. So one day my sister-in-law calls and she's like, the sales car's been at the office every day, like after 11. I'm like, oh, really? Well, okay, let's get on the computer, look at the GPS. Sure enough, he would come here, do the sales meeting, and go home. And he would sleep, like every day. And so he would come in, he's like, Pat, these flyers aren't working, this system isn't working, and the people, aren't buying, like excuse, right? But we know because we do it, and we have a track record, right, of everything. I'm like, oh, really? How many flyers did you get out? Oh, I got out 4 buckets this week. I'm like, oh, okay. So I obviously know that he's been home, you know what I mean, all day. And sure enough, he's working like 3 jobs. He's working at a gym at nighttime, and I didn't know that, So, and he's a younger gentleman. So he's working like 3 jobs, so ended up, seeing that, and then finally went to the house the second week we were doing it, because I was like, hey, you really got to get the flyers out. I obviously see you're not getting enough out, and he still signed them out. So anyway, went to my sister-in-law's house, knocked on the door. Sure enough, he's sleeping, went inside. The keys were right by his table. We picked it up, and he's like, huh? Like, what are you doing? Oh, just get my keys. You go back to sleep. It's okay. You know, and then so and he's like, what? No, what are you doing? You know, so we get the keys and I said, oh, by the way, hey, can you open the garage door for me? So he comes out, he's like, no, what are you doing? I'm like, just open the garage door. So I open the garage door and sure enough, all my bins are right there, loading them up in the car. I said, hey, have a nice life, you know? Because the system, you have to have systems in place, checks and balances. Without accountability, you have anarchy, right? So you got to hand out the flyers. So sure enough, you know, that was his last day. He knew he did wrong. You know, he's lying to us. So there's so many things that we ran into with that. You got to make sure that you're on top of them. You're giving them something to do each day. That way they're making money. Because if they're not making money, you're not making money. This is a love.
Throw the flyers away.
Yeah, I have had that happen. It was a homeless guy called me. He's like, man, I got a sweet bed out here, but it's a little rocky with these clips. You know, big pile of clips at the end of the train track underneath a bridge. Oh, you gotta be kidding me. I'm like, he's like,
mattress, give him a damn flyer.
that's right. Yeah. Well, I'm gonna come get those, you know. So we had to pick up some flyers and stuff. So you gotta have GPS tracking, you know what I mean, and that kind of stuff. So you always have to be one step ahead of them. So if nothing is going on, give them doors to knock, or write personal letters, or go do that small commercial stuff. You know, if you get a dry spell, it's raining. He's like, what do we do on a rainy day? I'm going out to hotels. I'm going out to dealerships. You know what I mean? I literally was on 385 and I was driving down. I'm like, whoa. All of a sudden it was like green. It was like a rainy day. Because what happens when it rains? All that mold and mildew gets darker and you see it really, really good. Rainy days are perfect for demos. You don't have to pre-wet the concrete to do a really good demo. You know, me and Don did a demo down there at Cracker Barrel. Wake up, Don. So, but you know, rainy days are really good days to do, you know, that unsolicited proposals and really starting to build relationships and stuff like that. So that's what I do on rainy days. I walked into that dealership and I wrote a $3,000 ticket for just doing their trim. You know, you just never know. You got to be in the right place at the right time. You know, I can't do everything. In the beginning, you're like running around. You can't hit all these places. You want to replicate the system. I remember we were doing a hotel and we were doing it like every 3 years. I'm like, oh, shoot, it's time to clean that hotel. I was like, Sam, run down there and go quote the hotel. And sure enough, he went down there, closed $4,500. I wouldn't have been able to do that because I was too busy, right? If you're on a truck, you're doing this, you got to replicate you. Get those territory managers.